na mboka oyo depuis des années bato bazali koya awa bazana eloko te na poche soki bakei bakomi ba milliardaire biso tozotikala kaka bapauvre.
With demand for electric vehicles on the rise, we know we have an important role to play in providing the market with high-quality, responsibly sourced material.
Tuliishi kulima maji yetu, bivuko vyetu, vitu vyetu, masomo yetu ile tulikuwa nasomesha watoto, biko natufundisha watoto mudeni, hospitali, maternite yetu, soko yetu, kiwanja kia kabumbu yetu kile kenyewe watoto walikuwa nafanya nini nachezea, makanisa haina hako.
Kolwezi, the capital of the Lualaba province, is a mining city in the south of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. For over a century, mining has been at the center of everyday life here. But more recently, large industrial mining projects, extracting cobalt and copper, have been expanding at an incredibly rapid pace. To make way for these vast open-pit mines, residents are being forcibly evicted from their homes and farmland. In some cases, entire neighborhoods have quite literally been erased from the map. This dramatic expansion is, for the most part, being driven by the growing global demand for minerals that are essential to our transition away from fossil fuels and our ability to tackle the increasing severity of the climate crisis. In particular, cobalt, which is typically mined and processed alongside copper, is required in the manufacturing of lithium-ion rechargeable batteries that power everything from mobile devices to electric cars, and enable the storage of energy generated by renewables such as wind and solar power. This rare mineral exists in only a few places on the planet, one of which is right here, under the busy streets and farmlands of Kolwezi. In fact, the cobalt reserves found here hold more than the rest of the world combined. So if you're watching this video on a phone, tablet, or laptop, there's a good chance it was made using cobalt mined in this region.
Congo, Congo nde mboka, mboka ngo mokengeli koi, mboka ngo mokengeli leopard.
Kolwezi is one of the biggest cities in the Central African Copper Belt that stretches from southern DRC to northern Zambia. While mining has shaped the city's landscape, livelihoods, and culture, bringing roads, housing, sanitation, and employment, it has also brought many harmful consequences. The DRC's abundant natural wealth has meant a long history of foreign companies extracting and exporting gold, diamonds, uranium, copper, tin, and countless other minerals at the expense of the Congolese people. King Leopold II of Belgium notoriously claimed the country as his private property in 1885, subjecting the population to forced labor to harvest rubber for the machine components and car tires that drove industrialization across Europe and North America. This reign of deliberate and systematic brutality, combined with famine and disease, led to the preventable deaths of as many as 10 million people, over half of the country's population at the time. 100 years later, the global economy, with the electric car industry at the center, is undergoing a new transition that is heavily reliant on the DRC. And once again, foreign interests in pursuit of enormous financial gains are willfully ignoring the human suffering at the beginning of the supply chain, often with consent from the DRC government. In 2016, Amnesty International and AfroWatch documented how thousands of children, some as young as 8, were working in so-called artisanal mines, dug by informal workers with only basic hand tools. In these hazardous conditions, many were losing their lives to supply the cobalt that would eventually be sold to global tech brands and car manufacturers. Today, human rights violations in the artisanal mining sector have become the subject of much international attention, fueling debates about the viability of transitioning to renewable energy. For residents, the future security of their homes, communities, and livelihoods is a growing concern that has so far been ignored.
Toutes les maisons que tu vois derrière nous ont été détruites. Ici, c'était chez ses voisins déjà, parce que quelque part là, vous avez la limite.
My name is Candy Ofime, and I'm a researcher on the climate justice team at Amnesty International. In 2022, alongside the Initiative for Good Governance and Human Rights, a Kolwezi-based NGO, I met with families affected by the expansion of 4 industrial mining projects. Using satellite imagery, drone footage, and 3D modeling, we have been able to analyze the adverse impacts of the expanding open pit mines. While interviews with the dozens of families evicted from their homes and farmlands tell the human story.
C'est la maison que j'ai habitée depuis 1994.
Wow. We spoke to Edmond Moussens while walking through the rubble of the house that he had owned since 1994, but had been forced to dismantle after it was scheduled to be demolished by Comus, the operator of the advancing open pit mine at the end of his street.
Nos attentes étaient qu'on puisse mieux nous payer. Parce que selon la loi, elle dit ceci, si vous délocalisez quelqu'un, il doit habiter dans un milieu plus meilleur que là où il était. Mais malheureusement, c'est pratiquement le contraire.
Mr. Moussens' attempts to obtain acceptable compensation failed, and the next time we went to see him, he was in the process of moving the remnants of his house, brick by brick, to the outskirts of Kolwezi, where he has started to rebuild. Mr. Moussens' story is typical of many of the mining-impacted residents we spoke to. In fact, the expansion of 3 out of the 4 mining projects we investigated had led to forced evictions conducted without the sufficient application of legal standards under Congolese and international human rights law. In cases where the mining companies resettled residents in substitute housing, evictees had to endure income loss, poor sanitation, or water and electricity shortages.
Il y avait des maisons ici, il y a des familles qui vivaient ici.
But sadly, this is only half of the story. Some of the people we spoke to had experienced far worse. In some of the cases we heard, forced evictions had been accompanied by horrific acts of violence. Mukumbi, a settlement to the northeast of Kolwezi, was razed to the ground, disappearing from satellite imagery entirely, to be replaced by a processing plant built by Shemaf, a mining operator owned by a private company based in Dubai. Kanini Maska, a former resident of Mukumbi, told us how her family, along with many former residents, were brutally evicted from their homes by the Congolese Republican Guard, a military unit in charge of protecting the country's president.
Sasa tunakuwa najiuliza, kumbe kunakuwa vita, kumbe kunakuwa nini? A partir ya pale unajua soda na bunduki na sheba villageois bakumashamba tunashikia boka. Tunatetemeka wakati biko nachoma manyumba.
Joseph Kitenge, another former resident of Mukumbi, cares for his niece, who was left with scars after being badly burned by the fire set during the raid.
Mi muzazi, kuko nyumba ile balinichomea na mabintu yangu. Ile ni droit yangu, nitalomba droit yangu ke societe anapasha kuniripa. me kupari ya mtoto muvile anasufrir.
We also spoke to Kabibi, whose real identity we are protecting. She told us she was brutally gang raped by 3 soldiers after she attempted to get to her crops, which had been blocked by military forces patrolling the nearby mine. The mine operator, Metalcol, is a subsidiary of the Kazakh company Eurasian Resources Group.
Mirishikiaga ni malari, mirishikiaga malari. Mwili yote mzima, kichwa kinajinguluka hivi. Njumishi yaonaga bile bintu bya vile maisha yangu hata mkizazi ketu kutufanikia bile bintu bya vile. Makuta yenyewe baturipe hiyo sasa tunafisha kote, baturipe kwa makuta tuone kwa damu na kuishi na batoto kwa masomo.
Today, the manufacture of one electric vehicle requires just over 13 kilograms of cobalt. With production dramatically increasing, some experts are predicting a 6-fold rise in global demand for cobalt by 2040 from the electric vehicle industry alone. Vast quantities of valuable minerals will flow from the DRC, generating great wealth for the shareholders and executives of the mining companies. Meanwhile, residents' brave attempts to fight back and demand adequate compensation have, for the most part, been ignored. Without a change of direction, forced evictions will no doubt continue. The mining projects we investigated are run by large, multinational, foreign-owned companies, with the Congolese government as a minority shareholder in both Comus and Kamoa.
Engaging with our community and managing our environmental impact forms a core part of how we operate.
The promotional videos produced by the mining companies show they are keen to present an image of their activities in the DRC as ethical and sustainable, but they only tell one side of the story. The mining-impacted residents that we spoke to offer a very different perspective that we think the world should hear. In response to our report, some of the claims made by residents have been contested by the mining companies. Comus responded by stating the ensured procedures and processes are valid and compliant with regulations. Shemaf rejects any allegation that the company has been involved in the destruction of a village called Mukumbi. ERG said they seek to avoid involuntary resettlements and constructively engage with local communities in line with relevant laws. And Kamoa claimed that at the time of the resettlement of Muvunda, their relocation standards were benchmarked to international best practices as defined in our entitlement framework, which is precisely what we executed. But regardless of how they explain their role, it is clear that the Congolese authorities and the mining operators did not do enough to protect the rights of residents who were forced from their homes and farmlands. Two years after taking office, President Tshisekedi visited Kolwezi and expressed his concern at the lack of benefits for residents, given a speech in which he claimed, "I cannot accept that investors win and that Congo loses." He has also called the DRC a solution country to the climate crisis due to its large reserves of energy transition minerals, peatlands, and rainforest. But he has so far shown a lack of political will to tackle the adverse human rights impacts of industrial copper and cobalt mining in the region. President Tshisekedi and the DRC government face a critical choice: to allow mining companies to continue to fill the deep pockets of their shareholders at enormous human cost, contributing a new chapter to the country's history of exploitation by foreign corporate interest, or commit to becoming a world leader in climate justice, proving that the protection of human rights is possible, particularly for communities that live in the shadow of large industrial mines. Now, more than ever, the world needs the DRC's rare mineral wealth to help build a zero-carbon future for all. But the rights of communities must not continue to be sacrificed in pursuit of this goal. Join us in calling on the DRC government, multinational mining companies, and their investors to end forced evictions at cobalt and copper industrial mines and put human rights first. on cobalt-powered mobile devices. The world is watching.